The killer folk, first introduced in C.M. Kosemen's 2006 book All Tomorrows, are a future human race of people who came about as a result of genetic engineering perpetrated by the book's main antagonists, the Q. The killer folk began life as star people, genetically engineered humans who were created by Earth and Mars scientists in the 31st century, following a bloody interstellar war between the two planets. After some time, the star people had colonized countless planets throughout the Milky Way galaxy, and theirs was a galactic society of true progress. However, after coming into contact with the malevolent Q and being conquered by them, they were imprisoned and genetically engineered into a great many baffling new forms. This was the Q's mission, to remake the universe and all life forms within it. The result of this on one planet was two new forms, named in the book simply as the Predators and the Prey. While the prey were designed to be herbivorous grazers like the antelopes of old Earth, the predators were made to be exactly what their name suggested. While there were a few different forms of predators, many said to resemble the vampires and goblins of old Earth folklore, the most common and successful variation of human predator had modified fingers and thumbs with razor-sharp claws, which they would use to tear their prey apart. They had gaping jaws and sharp teeth and large sensitive ears, which made them the most efficient predators on the planet. They had all the attributes of the mammalian predators of old Earth, including a strong, lean yet muscular frame, and they seemed to be covered in a short fur, with a spotted pattern running from the tops of their heads all the way down their backs, similar to leopards and cheetahs. Their eyes, it should be noted, still seem remarkably human, as do their noses. They are described also as having disproportionate heads, meaning that they still possessed large brains which would help them in re-evolving their human intelligence further down the line. These predators, judging by the timeline at the beginning of the book, eventually hunted the prey into extinction, as the prey did not, as far as we know, have any descendants by the time the intelligent killer folk had come into being. Or it could be that the prey had simply devolved even further by this point, and were not even recognizably human, instead resembling something more like a farm animal, hence their not getting a mention at this point in the timeline. The human predators had now evolved to become the killer folk. By this point, the killer folk had lost much of their primitive apparatus used for hunting and killing, such as their saber teeth and razor-sharp claws. They still persisted in a small way, but had now shrunken down and become fragile, and were now only used as indications of status. They were no longer really useful as weapons, much like the canines of a 21st century human. They still, however, seem to possess short fur on parts of their bodies, as can be seen in the illustration which shows a young male member of this race exploring ancient ruins on his planet. The fur and cheetah-like spotted pattern is still present on his neck and probably down his back as well. It seems as though the fur has since disappeared from their hands, arms and much of the face, however, and a head of human-like hair now persists thanks to their human DNA, which lay dormant for countless millennia, finally re-emerging during the course of their evolution. The killer folk, despite becoming fully sentient, were still quite in tune with their killer instincts. They were still much stronger than the Homo sapiens of their distant ancestry, and it would seem that every individual had the ability and the constitution to quickly and easily kill others, but as they were no longer primitives, they would only do so if they really wanted to and if the circumstances allowed for it. While bare-handed murder was possible, the killer folk at this point seemed to prefer the use of weapons, such as bows and arrows or powerful gas rifles. Throughout their history, the killer folk had naturally developed many religions, the majority of which had rituals involving killing and allowed for sacred periods of hunting one another and engaging in duels to the death. On the whole, these were civilized and orderly communities which would, at specific and designated times, erupt into orgies of death, perhaps similar to the Purge series of films. This gave rise to so-called hunter nobilities, who were privileged warriors skilled in the art of killing. The hunting of others was of such importance to the killer folk throughout most of their history that it can be theorized that their civilizations would have had many parallels with the fictional Yautja, also known as predators, from the popular science fiction Predator films. The Yautja have strict codes of honor and hunt to prove their worth to others of their kind, and also take trophies from their kills. It could be that the killer folk and the Yautja at one point were quite similar. All of this would persist from their earliest civilizations up until the point where they underwent an industrial revolution, in which factory farming was established in some regions, thus further removing the killer folk from their murderous ways. It could be theorized that the industrial factory factory farming practices came much later in their development than in their 21st century human ancestors, as hunting and killing was of such psychological importance to them. While some regions began using factory farming as their means of attaining meat products, some countries wanted to keep alive the traditions of hunting and killing, and the resulting tensions between those who wished to move on from their old ways and those who believed it was their right to practice these acts of death almost resulted in a cataclysmic global conflict, which they were, luckily, able to avoid. The killer folk, it seemed, then progressed and continued to live and thrive for tens of millions of years and, along with the Satyriaks who they had managed to contact after broadcasting radio communications into space in their search for other life forms, founded the Second Galactic Empire. At some point during this time, the killer folk had learned all about their ancestral roots and what the Q had done to the star people many millions of years ago. Several other future human species would eventually join the Empire, and it would be a long and prosperous venture lasting tens of millions of years, in which the peoples of all these distant worlds would exchange information and experiences, and would forge a unity that spanned many millions of light years of distance, all standing together and all being at the ready for the next alien invasion. No alien invasion ever came, however. Ironically, it would be another future human race that would bring about the end of the killer folk and the Second Galactic Empire. The Gravital, future humans now in machine form, would destroy all worlds with organic life, believing themselves to be the only true heirs to the star people. While most worlds were killed off by the Gravital using great sails millions of miles wide to block out their suns, an illustration in the book shows that the killer folk's homeworld was invaded directly. One theory is that the killer folk had gotten wind of the coming invasion from one of their allied worlds within the Empire, and were able to disable the Gravital's sun sail before it could be fully activated. With this, it may have necessitated a head-on assault by the Gravital. The killer folk were still made extinct by the Gravital, but their unique social profile as historic killers may have given them more of an edge in matters of war, meaning that they didn't succumb to the Gravital invasion as quickly as some of the other future human worlds. The killer folk had met their end, as all species eventually do, but they had lived their lives and survived for millions and millions of years, and while they were now gone, organic life would still continue in other parts of the galaxy. Thank you for watching my video on the killer folk. If you enjoyed it, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to be notified of future uploads. This has been Beware the Q, and I'll see you in the next video.